among natural scientists, and I think even many other academics, that participating in politics or action is at odds with good science. There's a really nice article by two ecologists, Nelson and Vucetich, talking about this and looking at advocacy and looking at how scientists felt. They found most ecologists felt like advocacy was something that they should avoid, that they should communicate results to normal scientific venues through journals. That's what correct communication is. Advocacy is when you go beyond just having your paper published. And they said, there's problems with it. If you end up being associated with some kind of idea or policy, it saps your credibility as scientists being neutral, impartial observers. There's a lot of time commitments, and I don't want to be an advocate. It's not what I do. I'm a scientist. That science is objective and advocacy is subjective. And they go through all of these and very nicely, I think, counter them. They point out, for example, that for one thing, and this is very well confirmed, the public already views scientists as political actors. The cat is out of the bag. Besides which, that what our goal should be is to come up with credible advocacy based on sound ideas. And that is how you maintain credibility, not by avoiding advocacy, but making sure advocacy is based on solid reasoning. That's what you contribute as a scientist. That as scientists, we already balance a lot of different time commitments, that we recognize that you can't let your kids starve because you have an experiment on, so we already have conflicting values that we recognize. So maybe we should add advocacy or governance as one of the values that we have to put in there somewhere. You might not want to go take your kid to ballet, but sometimes you make that sacrifice, even though you have a pretty cool experiment going on. And in terms of objectivity and subjectivity, I hope I've established, at least put the question in your mind as to whether or not it's possible to separate things that way. And then the last point that I think is maybe one of the ones that resonates the most with me is that, like I said, we recognize we have multiple moral obligations. We have obligations to behave in certain ways beyond just being good scientists. Arguably, as citizens and people who supposedly care about our sustainable future, we have a greater obligation to try and fix things than we do to be a good scientist by our own definition. It's at least a conversation. It's not just, okay, well, I'm a scientist, not a citizen anymore. You at least have to think about, do you have an obligation as citizens who are not restricted from public, by definition, not restricted from participating? Why are scientists not allowed to participate as a citizen of the process? Why are they not obligated to participate by the knowledge they have and expertise they have? And one of the ideas, the most basic ideas, is that every environmental problem has a political aspect. Just because you don't engage in it doesn't mean it's not there. And if you don't look at, for example, who's profiting and who's losing in a situation, that doesn't mean it's an apolitical situation. It just means you're not really fully understanding it. And indeed, if you any implemented political solution to environmental problems is going to create winners and losers, inevitably. So the challenge, the goal is to try and figure out, who should win what and who should lose what. Not taking part of that process does not mean people don't lose. Actually, it means that probably the poor will lose and the marginalized, the minorities will lose. And so by taking no position, by being apolitical, you're effectively advancing status quo. If you say, Howard Zinn, the historian, said you can't be neutral on a moving train. If you make no choice in a bad system, you're maintaining a bad system. So Robbins and political ecologists argue that this is inherently true, that there's always power differentials that affect decisions, and so you have to be involved in the decision unless you don't care about distribution of power, resources, and equity in society. So all those things in literature, they tend to find those to be a big part of the predictiveness of whether or not effective policy change happens. Have people thought about the problem? Are there more than one solution? That's actually something I emphasize to my students and try to my colleagues, that people are much more likely to be open to a discussion if there are alternatives. If you say there's a problem and this is the solution, Kingdon and others have found that it's much less likely to engage into an effective policy discussion. So you have to have options or alternative solutions. So there's a number of different parts to making effective change when you have like a crisis or something. Actually, I think that participation is a huge part of that answer, at least from my point of view. So Bob Costanza pointed out, he gave a lecture at Washington State last year, well, he and many others have pointed out, how we divide up our time is a choice. And we work more hours in the United States than many other countries. And all these working extra hours and consuming extra things actually bring us smaller returns in terms of happiness. So part of Bob and other people's proposal has been we could actually willingly work less. And willingly working less, for one thing, would allow us to consume less, less driving back and forth to the job, eating lunch out. And we could do things that we say we value, like spending time with our family and appreciating nature and art, that we don't have time for. I think if we add to that, especially as faculty working with the community, the thing about that is it builds credibility. And there's been several studies that say very few people that say they know a scientist personally. If you're involved in your community, if you're talking to people, if you're a member of your community, that's how they're going to believe you over someone they see on TV, more likely. And so I think that's, in the long term, well, I think that's the only way to go. I think some people disagree or say it's not possible, but I think spending more time amongst our communities, I think the university is a great place for that, as it's supported by taxpayers. And outreach is not highly valued right now, but sort of my sinister plan for my, when I take over the world and contradict everything I just said, is that really there should maybe be faculty positions that are more like extension, but outside of agriculture. That there's an obligatory outreach portion of every professor's portfolio that you get tenure for having outreach, as well as publications, rather than outreach is a nice side thing to do. So that's my short answer.